proceed.
Thank you. I wanted to briefly touch on the Ready for Her campaign, and it's great that more women were participating in the election. Of course, there was Ask Her as well, and I think these initiatives are really important. I'm wondering, from Ready for Her, having more women run, do we understand how many more women there are on city and town councils and on school boards now as a result of having more women run?
Sorry, just give me 1 second. So I'm always happy to talk about this work, but strictly speaking, it's not part of this estimates, as it's not budgeted for an ongoing initiative. This was around the municipal elections.
Oh, okay.
The women's representation across the province moved from 26% to 29% following the 2017 municipal elections. What was really significant is that there was a 12% increase of women running compared to the 2013 election. Women made up 29% of the candidates, confirming that when women run, they win as often as men, given that we saw that exact percentage reflected in the election. So 29% of the candidates were women, 29% of the elected were women. In 2017, sorry, I was reading off something else. Yeah.
That's the end.
There you go. That's the end.
Okay, great. And I will pick up on the Central Alberta Immigrant Women's Association report. So it was recently released. I'm looking at a story about it from, last Friday. And one line in particular really struck me. From the report, the director said 70% of those contacted in gathering data said either they know someone affected by domestic violence or it's happened to them. That's a really high number. And my question isn't quite as specific as the previous one, but I'd like to understand what sorts of policies or supports are available to help bring that number down and to give support and outreach to women in these communities, especially in the context of the things that are barriers. So language is a barrier, culture, the understanding of what authority figures can and cannot do. Those are all barriers to women reaching out to help.
Mm-hmm. So, again, broadly speaking, we provide the GBA Plus analysis and support to other departments. And so we work cross-ministry. A lot of the direct funding from government for dealing with issues around violence, so for example funding for women's shelters, etc., comes from community and social services, and knowing these details and knowing that what this report is putting out confirms what we knew, which is that certain intersecting factors absolutely increase your risk for experiencing violence. And so it's unfortunately not surprising to hear these results that immigrant populations experience an increased risk in all aspects, and additional barriers in all aspects of their life. Language barriers is certainly a huge one, but also perhaps coming from a community where you have a different relationship with policing and the kinds of community resources that we provide here. So we know this, and it absolutely influences the work that's done across government. With respect to ways that status of women has an opportunity to, in a more direct way, influence these issues, would obviously come through our granting. And so it's highly dependent in terms of our ability to impact outside, other than going through our work with cross-ministry, is again through our grants. And so we we were able to provide a grant to Calgary Catholic Immigration Society towards a collaborative mentoring project that ensures immigrants experiencing family violence can receive culturally relevant support. And so that goes to the underlying issue that is in part addressed by that report, which is having culturally relevant support and response to the issues. So I've met with some of the immigrant associations. One in Edmonton comes to mind, where it was explained to me how it needs to, these concepts need to be taught differently sometimes to the men in these communities when they come from a background from a different societal structure, where some of these practices that are illegal here are perhaps more commonplace there. And so speaking to them from individuals in their own community, as opposed to more of a top-down approach, somebody that actually comes from that background and understands it. So I think that canvasses the question.
So with your grants, do you ever do any outreach to communities? Because you've spoken about Calgary Catholic Immigrant Society. For a rural community that is, it looks like it's pretty grassroots. It looks like it is run by and for immigrant women who may not be aware of the grants that are available. Does the ministry participate in any outreach to those communities to connect them with those kinds of resources?
Absolutely. In general, these things are certainly impacted, and we know from Gender-Based Analysis Plus that your geographic location can absolutely and does often disproportionately and negatively impact both your susceptibility to violence, but also your ability to respond to it. And so we sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Just jumped out of my head.
It's been a long day.
Yes, it certainly has. But we support survivors of sexual violence in all areas of the province, and work very closely with community partners to provide services in rural communities. For example, the governments of Canada and Alberta announced a joint investment of $1.9 million to increase capacity at Mountain Rose Women's Shelter in Rocky Mountain House. And our community grants also went towards addressing violence in rural communities. So the Camrose Family Violence Action Society, for example, received just over $23,000 to support expressive art programs for women in Camrose and surrounding area who are recovering from domestic violence. The Boys and Girls Club of White Court and District received just over $36,000 to deliver information sessions to young people in White Court to increase understanding of family and sexual violence committed against women and girls. The Pembina Crisis Connection Society received $3,000 to deliver programs to Drayton Valley and area junior and high school students on the prevention of sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, and family violence. The Hope Resource Center in Westlock received $50,000 to provide support services to women and children experiencing domestic violence.
So are those through outreach that they were connected with?
Oh, sorry.
The
Yes, thank you. That's my brain fart there, where I was like, where was I going with this? So we have a number of stakeholders, and so we rely heavily, being a small ministry, on our networks, but also on media to cover the launch of our grants program. And so we also work very closely with our rural MLAs to get the information out to to communities where the granting is open. But we have very deep and strong connections with women's organizations and organizations that serve women throughout the province.
Apologize to interrupt. We'll revert back to Government Caucus.